I'm Maria Elena Giassi, and this is Currents. In a major document released today, the Vatican adds its voice to the swell of voices calling for global financial reform. But will its message be heard above the crowds? Plus, they're talking revolution from Wall Street to Wichita, Kansas. But is their message muddled? And it was a timely discussion at St. John's University on the growing divide between the haves and the have-nots.
Those of us who own stock in a company have to realize that we are part of a larger system of God's intention.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Healthcare, jobs, and of course the overall economy have people taking to, and in many cases, occupying the streets in protest on Wall Street here in New York and in cities around the world. And today, a new document from the Vatican proposes some ideas to cure the world of its financial ills. Today, the Vatican's Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace released Towards Reforming the International Financial and Monetary Systems in the Context of a Global Public Authority, a document addressing the current global economic crisis. One of its key points is a proposal for a world central bank, or a world watchdog, to regulate global markets. The document says that the current financial crisis has revealed, quote, selfishness, collective greed, and the hoarding of goods on a great scale. For more insight on the proposal, our news director, Ed Wilkinson, spoke earlier today with Albany Bishop Howard Hubbard, the chairman of the U.S. Bishops' Committee on International Justice and Peace.
Bishop Hubbard, thanks for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Ed.
Yeah. A new Vatican document this morning, Bishop, seems to call for a world political authority to regulate financial markets. Is this something new that the Vatican is calling for, or is this just the Church's message to preach for the common good?
Well, it is consistent with the Church's message throughout the centuries to be concerned about the common good. This particular document was issued by the Pontifical Council for Peace and Justice, and actually the roots of this goes back to Pope John the 23rd's encyclical Pacem Terris. At that time, he hinted, although he didn't specifically call for a supranational authority that would oversee what he prophesied would be a global economy at one point in time. Mm-hmm. And then in his 1967 encyclical Populorum Progressio, Pope Paul VI outlined the trajectories of the close relationship that exists in the world and how we must have an organization that can help promote the common good. And Pope John Paul II also spoke about some type of supranational authority in a number of his papal encyclicals. However, it was most recently called for by Pope Benedict XVI in his encyclical Caritas in Veritate. And at that time, he said that the current economic crisis provides an opportunity for us, an opportunity to produce a new agenda for the world. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, there has been kind of progression of Catholic thought on this matter. Now, I think it should be noted that the document put out by the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace understands that this is a hard reality to, number one, grasp, and number two, to implement. So they anticipate that this would only be done in a gradual fashion. But they are pointing out that the current monetary system and financial system that exists within nations and worldwide needs to be reformed.
Yeah, Bishop, do you think this is maybe a little overly idealistic? I mean, we have an international institution like the United Nations, which has just had some limited success. Aren't we asking a lot for countries to give up their own private interests to essentially for the poor?
Well, it's interesting that the document does speak about the United Nations being the organization that would best be able to set up this authority that would handle financial and monetary systems. But it also speaks very strongly in one part of the document about the principle of subsidiarity, which means that what can be done on a national level or a regional level should remain at that level, and it's only in addressing those problems that transcend the regional and national that should be handled by this authority.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any connection between the worldwide movements like the Occupy Wall Street movement and what the document is saying?
I certainly think that this document would resonate well with those who are part of that movement. But as I say, this is part of an unfolding discussion that has existed in the Church going back to Pope John the 23rd, and I'm sure that this document was in print, ready to be published long before the Wall Street movement began. Okay,
Bishop Howard Hurbard, thank you so much for your insights on this.
Okay, it's a pleasure to talk to you, Ed.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We have much more currents ahead. Aid workers hit the ground running in Turkey after a devastating earthquake on Sunday. We'll have that story and the rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Maria Elena Giassi. Coming up later, could the centuries-old church teaching hold the answer to Occupy Wall Street? But first, let's have a look at the rest of the day's headlines. The Caritas Emergency Response Team in Turkey is on its way to the region devastated by a powerful magnitude 7.2 earthquake that struck on Sunday. The death toll has risen to almost 300 people, with at least 1,300 more injured. The deadly quake leveled close to 1,000 buildings in eastern Turkey, one of the country's poorest regions. The region was hit by numerous aftershocks, the largest measuring at magnitude 6.0. Turkey's military is also assisting with the search and rescue efforts. In the power vacuum left in the wake of Muammar Gaddafi's death last week, the new law of the land in Libya will be based on Islamic law. The head of Libya's transitional government says Sharia will be the basic source of law in the country. Sharia is the code of conduct for Islam. The announcement came during yesterday's celebrations in Benghazi, where Libya's new government leaders declared the country liberated. A Brooklyn man will plead not guilty by reason of insanity to the brutal murder of an 8-year-old Orthodox Jewish boy. Lawyers for Levi Aaron claim police officers coerced their client, telling Aaron what to write in his confession. Dismembered remains of Levi Kletsky were discovered in Aaron's refrigerator after Kletsky failed to return home from a religious day camp. The rest of the Kletsky's remains were discovered in a trash bin just blocks from Aaron's apartment. Local congressmen have joined the fight for an abstinence-based education option in New York City's public schools. Republicans Bob Turner, Michael Grimm, and others have joined with the NYC Parents' Choice Coalition in calling for the abstinence option. A mandate announced in August requires all city middle and high schools to offer a sex ed curriculum that includes how to use a condom and the appropriate age to be sexually active. From Florida, a man who was executed last month had sent a thank you letter to Miami Archbishop Thomas Wensky. In the letter, Manuel Valle thanked Archbishop Wensky for his efforts to halt the execution. Valle also wrote that he was at peace and prepared for whatever God had in store for him. The letter, however, did not arrive at Archbishop Wensky's office until after the execution. And turning to Alabama, where students in Alabama were told not to pray in their school's gymnasium. Reporter Marissa Mitchell caught up with some angry parents.
Just a morning prayer, just, give me strength to make it through the day. Thank you for being with me and following me.
A prayer like that, a quiet one, is what Jason and Megan Heron say landed their son in the principal's office. They say he and 5 friends joined hands in prayer in the middle of the gym. A faculty member asked them to move.
They moved from the center of the gym. They went to the bleachers and stood. And once they got there, they were asked again to sit. Not explained why they needed to sit or why they couldn't do it.
When the students didn't sit down, they ended up in the front office.
We're told once they got to the office that they couldn't pray in the gym with the student body all there.
Student-initiated prayer is permitted in schools. The Herons say the principal allows students to pray on campus, like here at the flagpole.
Marissa Mitchell reporting there. And we all take the occasional break at work, but these work breaks may cost some Hertz employees their jobs. Denise Whitaker brings us the details.
We feel like we're being punished for what we believe in.
Elise Omar is out of a job, terminated after she refused to clock in and out to pray at work. She is a Muslim who prays 5 times a day. In the past, Muslim employees at Hertz paused for their prayers without clocking out.
It's 5 minutes. It's not as big deal as the company's making.
But Hertz tells me some employees were abusing their privilege to pray. Spokesman Richard Broom, in an email, told me the abuse had become a significant problem, creating issues of fairness among employees. Teamsters Union 117, which represents Hertz drivers, tells me a blanket policy is not the way to address that.
If there's a problem with the performance or the conduct of any employee, you have the right to deal with that employee individually. That's not what they did here.
The union provided me with this notice, posted for employees at Hertz earlier this year. It stated employees who want to take their 10-minute break in smaller chunks don't have to punch, but must notify their supervisor. Then, September 30th, the union claims Hertz posted this new policy, which states all rest and meal periods must be punched, including all religious observation.
The company unilaterally implemented this policy to clock in and out and specifically identified prayer breaks in their policy. They have not applied the policy to people who take smoke breaks.
Hertz tells me clocking out is required for all breaks, and it is now enforcing that policy to prevent abuse.
That report from Denise Whitaker. Pope Benedict canonized 3 new saints yesterday during Mass in St. Peter's Square. The Church's 3 newest saints are Bishop Guido Maria Conforti, the founder of the Zavarian Missionaries, Father Luigi Guanella, who founded 3 religious orders, and Bonifacia Rodriguez Castro, who also founded a religious order, as well as a workshop to help disadvantaged women. Sunday's ceremony was not without incident. A man climbed the Vatican's colonnade and burned a Bible. He was eventually brought down and arrested. And for the first time, the feast of Blessed John Paul II was celebrated in Rome over the weekend. John Paul's feast day is October 22nd, the day his papacy officially began. It can be celebrated in Rome and Poland, John Paul's home country. Other dioceses must ask permission to hold the celebration. And Pope Benedict has tapped Archbishop Cardinal Donald Worrell of Washington to lead a synod of bishops on the new evangelization. Worrell will be responsible for issuing an address laying out the goals of the synod, which is scheduled to take place next year. Stay tuned, there's more currents ahead. Coming up, are the global Occupy movement's pie in the sky or legit demands for a piece of the pie? Elizabeth Scalia cuts through the rhetoric. Welcome back. The people occupying Wall Street have many demands on all sorts of issues: the financial system, the job market, and healthcare. But are the solutions they are proposing a case of being careful for what you wish for? That's exactly the point Elizabeth Scalia, the managing editor of the Catholic portal at pathos.com, makes in a recent online article. She writes that occupiers may find out that the solution they are demanding, which she calls revolutionary supervision of all our lives, may not be all it's cracked up to be. For more on this, our news editor, Ed Wilkinson, spoke by phone with Elizabeth earlier today.
Elizabeth Scalia, the Catholic editor for pathos.com. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Ed. It's nice to talk to you again.
I want to talk about this article that you had in First Things, and you were talking about the Occupy Wall Street movement that's going on now. Actually, you see it as almost a commentary on how we raise our kids today. What kind of parallels do you see there?
Well, to an extent, I think that's true. We have a situation here where we've raised our children with an enormous amount of prosperity, and so we've become extremely materialistic. We've become extremely dependent on prosperity that we've looked at as the American dream, and it's something that's promised to us and owed to us. Mm-hmm. And now we're seeing the result of this unbridled materialism because these children of this materialistic society are finding themselves overloaded in debt, wanting all of these things. I think it's an amazing and interesting commentary that the whole movement has been so supported by iPhones and iPads and all of the material things that they love and they need that are made by corporations, and yet they're feeling so out of the loop that they're not identifying. There's like a cognitive dissonance, and they're not even identifying their own possessiveness of these things with the same greed that they are quite rightly, crying out against on the street.
Well, I want to ask you exactly what do you think they're asking for? Because there seems to be some confusions about their aims and their purposes. What do you think they're asking for?
I'm not entirely sure they know what they want, because there's a big ragtag group down there. I mean, there are stated card-carrying socialists and Marxists who really want to overthrow the government and usher in that dream of socialism. Mm-hmm. And then there are others there who really, I think, would be very content to just see job opportunities open to them and a lessening of this enormous student debt that's really driving a lot of the young people down there.
We had a little debate in the office this morning, and people were saying, where would Jesus be on this? Would Jesus be with the Occupy Wall Street movement?
Oh, gosh, I would never want to speak for the Lord.
Well, you say in your piece that you have some sympathy with the people in Occupy Wall Street. Where do your sympathies lie with them? Where do you see some convergence?
Well, I have sympathy for them in the same way that I had sympathy for some of the people who are underwater with their mortgages, because the student loan bubble is like the housing bubble, partly the creation of a government recklessly encouraging this kind of acquisition of loans, and that inflated tuitions just as, the housing prices were inflated by the easy-to-get mortgages. Mm-hmm. Personal responsibility does have to come into play. When I read these, the Wall Street occupiers saying, we want to see some bankers frog-marched, why haven't any bankers been arrested? I am fine with that. I applaud that. My only concern is that they're not also asking to see some of these legislators, and I could say Chris Dodd and Barney Frank possibly, and many more, who enabled this entire situation to occur. And when other members of the government said, hey, we need to look at this, we need to reform this, this is out of control, said, no, everything is just fine. Okay. And now it's all blowing up in our faces. It can't just be the fault of the bankers. It has to be laid at the government's doorstep as well. And here's where more cognitive dissonance comes in. Yeah. How can you on one hand say, I'm in trouble here because of this government, which managed the student loans and the mortgages so badly, and wrote such ruinous policies in both cases, but I want to give them more power.
I want to quickly ask you about the Vatican document that came out this morning on the world economy. Have you had a chance to read it yet?
It's 18 pages long, and it did just come out this morning, and I have not, unfortunately, had much of a chance to do more than look at the headlines and see how it's being spun. And it's being spun predictably. Almost any time the press gets its hand on any sort of pronouncement coming out of the Vatican, they do a couple of things. The first thing they do is say, the Pope says this, when in fact this is the Pontifical Council for Peace and Justice, not the Pope per se. And secondly, they begin to cherry-pick what they like from it, what they think advances a narrative, or what they think creates a narrative they want to advance. And in this case, they appear to want to advance a narrative that the Pope is exhorting the world to create a one-world bank. And that's scaring an awful lot of people. And there are people like Thomas Peters over at AmericanPapist.com, or I think it's actually called CatholicVote.com now, who are arguing that, no, that's not exactly what Benedict is saying. In fact, he's not calling for this at all, and he's kind of trying to counter the narrative. I don't know how effective he'll be. Okay. If you remember when the Pope suggested that there might be some instances where condom use could be
right.
justified. The press ran with the Pope said condom
Sure.
was great, and those were the headlines for 4 days.
Well, Elizabeth Scalia, always interesting. Thank you very much for finding some time to be with us today.
Thank you, Ed. It was good talking to you.
Right.
We've linked to Elizabeth's article on Twitter. Just look for @CurrentsNY. Stay tuned. There's more Currents ahead. When we return, can you imagine a world without the poor? A poverty conference believes that dream could become reality.
The Catholic teaching on justice dates back to the ancient Bible and rules there among the Israelites about taking care of poor people in those days.
Finally tonight, is the answer to the country's and the world's financial woes to be found in some radical new philosophy? Or are the solutions to be discovered in age-old teachings? This past weekend, St. John's University hosted a talk by one of the preeminent scholars on economics and the teachings of the Catholic Church at a conference looking at ways to tackle poverty in the U.S.
Let me be the first, among the first, to welcome you to St. John's University and the 7th Biannual Vincentian Chair of Social Justice Conference entitled Poverty Eradication, Intergenerational Justice, Stewardship, Solidarity, and Subsidiarity.
We began these poverty conferences many years ago. They are meant to bring before a diverse group the serious issues that preclude social justice within our nation and within the world.
What the Pope is saying here is that those of us who own stock in a company, those of us who, some people may own businesses, have to realize that we are part of a larger system of God's intention.
Our keynote speaker today is Professor Dan Finn. He's recognized throughout the country as being the most, one of the most knowledgeable and talented theologians who is also an economist.
So while it sounds very radical and maybe even Marxist to think that capitalists have this kind of obligation, it's not a matter of Marx. It started 2,000 years before Marx was born, you know? This is the long tradition of Catholic social thought talking. The Catholic teaching on justice dates back to the ancient Bible and rules there among the Israelites about taking care of poor people in those days. And it's been true for the New Testament and the early church and the Middle Ages. And so the church leaders today, church people today, are attempting to live that out in a new situation where we live in an international market economy and many things are quite different from what they used to be. But the basic principles are the same, that we who are prosperous have an obligation to help those who are being left behind in this economic system. If we think that just because wealthy people get wealthier, they're going to invest in firms that create jobs, we misunderstand what goes on. And I think most economists, I think it's probably fair to say most would say, if you, in that situation, a dollar from taxing the wealthy that goes to repave the interstate out here is going to create more jobs than the dollar if you leave it in the pocket of the wealthy person.
We really started to think about our conference and how it would be developed a year ago. So the recent events of the occupation really just more or less verify the fact that it was a good choice of topic.
I haven't heard any official statement from the Catholic Church about the occupation movement, but certainly the goals of the occupation movement overlap with goals of the Catholic Church for more attention to ordinary people and their well-being.
We do not want this conference to end without concrete action and promised involvement of every person here in this room.
There's a lot we have to do to build the city of God here in Queens, New York, and our conference is one way of working towards a better world and a more just and sustainable future, as they say here today.
That is all for this edition of Currents. Coming up tomorrow, parents and elected officials lock arms in the battle for choice in New York City's public schools. You won't want to miss it. Until then, be sure to visit us online at currentsny.net and check us out on Facebook and Twitter. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Maria Elena Giassi. Thank you for watching and have a great night.